Hello and welcome to another card layout from me, John Bloodworth, Gentleman Crafter. Here's the card that I'm going to make in this video. Again, it's one that didn't quite turn out how I planned, but I got there in the end. So stick with it and I will share. So the layout here is a couple of panels basically. And the materials I'm using are some pigment ink pads, an embossing folder, some dies, some stamps, and some patterned paper, which is technically not a tool, but it's going to form part of the card. So that's everything I'm using. Time to get making. So from an A4 sheet of card, if I trim that down to 6 inches by 8 inches and then fold that in half, that will give me a 6 by 4 card base. Clever that, isn't it? It's almost like maths without having to do maths. Anyway, just basically making sure that's perfectly scored, and there we have the design, or the card even. So for one of the panels, I actually pre-cut it and then have gone ahead and embossed that already, so you can see there. And what I'm going to do is some dry brushing. Now I got this pot out of copper paint, but discovered that it had totally dried up, so I had to reach for a pigment ink pad, which is almost equally dry, but there is some blue paint left on that blending brush. So I'm getting a metallic blue, and then I remembered I actually have a metallic blue ink pad. So I thought I'd get some of that involved as well. And do you know what? It kind of worked. It almost looked like I'd sanded down a white cord cardstock. That's not easy to say, but it almost gave it an embossed metallic look, which is fab. So that's going to form the main panel down the right hand side of the card. So I'm gluing that up with the bookbinding glue, making sure that I pick out lots of the ridged areas because that's where it's going to stick. Using a gridded ruler to make sure I get that on straight. What I hadn't realised was I'd actually cut it wrong, so that it's a bit wonky at the bottom. But shh, let's not tell anyone. Just going to pop a heavy plate on top of that while I die cut some cogs. I like these, there's a nice variety. And they cut really well as well. Not sure what I was trying to say there. Anyway, there they are, all chopped out. So I'm going with the variety of the small and the large, just to give the ensemble, it's a posh French word for you, I hope, some interest. Let's call it interest. Choppy choppy out the big one. Don't you wish your die cutting machine went that fast? Mine doesn't really, I just edited it. Pretty sure you figured that out. Anyway, sweep all your little bits onto the floor, or into a bin if you prefer. And then I'm going to add some of the dry brushing to those as well. Now, I will be honest, partway through this I thought, why am I even just bothering with the brush? Why don't I just use the ink pad? And you'll see that happen in a moment. But while I'm doing that, let me say, you could use anything. If you've got some gilding waxes or some decorative waxes, metallic paints, basically it's just really giving the die cuts a little something extra other than just being plain cardstocks. So it doesn't really matter what you've got in your collection. Hopefully you should be able to find something to use, even if it's a coloured acrylic paint. Cheapo one at that. Okay, on with the stamping. So for that I'm using this set from Visible Image, and because it's the first time I'm using them, I'm going to give them a test print using a sticky ink, a black pigment ink, as I find this works best on polymer stamps. Of course, use whatever you've got available. Okay, that looked okay, so I went ahead and did the main stamping. Doink, there we go. Clean off the stamp and put it away, John, and be a good boy. Otherwise you will end up with rubbish everywhere and you'll have to spend hours tidying up instead of making. That should be my new resolution. Sort it out now. I had a thought while I was just waiting for that ink to cure that I was going to use a couple of those decorative headed pins in the design, so I grabbed those while I was just waiting. Snippy snippy with the scissors, and then bizarrely another completely dry ink pad, or at least there's just enough for a little bit of shading around the edges. I think I'm going to have a day sorting through all the supplies and seeing what's dried up and what's not. And then maybe a little shopping trip. Okay, so there we go. That's that. I quite like that sentiment. For a card especially. Something very different. Right, let's have a look. Let's start arranging these. Now, what I thought when I started arranging these was they don't really stick out much from the background. Yes, they work. Yes, they tie in with the design. Yes, they've got a similar style. But I wanted them to have a little bit more oomph. So I reached for the embossing ink and embossing powders. A nice gold one. A matte gold even, not a shiny gold. And then set about prodding them into the ink, dipping them into the embossing powder, and then in just a bit I will be applying the heat to melt that embossing powder. I'm not too fussed about getting a perfect covering because these are cogs, they're working mechanisms, there will be some tarnish, there will be some damage, so distressed is my saviour. Right, even on a low heat speed these were blowing away, so I had to get the old tweezers involved. Pretty sure I should be doing this on a glass mat or something, but as long as the craft room isn't bursting up in flames and burning down around my ears, I'm going with it. There we go. Nice, I like it. What do you reckon? I would have preferred a copper embossing powder, but I haven't got one, so maybe another shopping trip. I act like I'm disappointed about having a shopping trip. The only person that is the bank manager. Okay, so a couple of the smaller ones are going to go on the sentiment panel, which will itself be raised up. And then some of the bigger ones are going to go in the background. And then I'm not quite sure how I was going to finish this off at this time, but I was just going with it. I think you can probably see by the way that I'm just putting things down, then checking positioning, that I was kind of winging it, doing it on the fly. Just making sure it worked. Sometimes I have a plan, sometimes I have an idea, sometimes I have no clue. In fact, most of the time I have no clue. Right, that's the big cogs on. Say that slowly. Now for the sentiment panel. Just getting rid of some stray embossing powder. And stupid me put the foam pads on the wrong bit. I wanted to use dimensional glue on that, so yoink them off and use them as shoes. Silly boy. Okay, off with the backings on the foam pads. And down it goes. There we go. And then into the dimensional glue I shall prod a couple of these decorative glass-headed pins, and then they look like levers. I thought that was quite clever. A finishing touch perhaps of a few gems, and then I reckon this card will be done. So, what do you reckon? Did it work out in the end? Would you have done something differently? Who would you give this to? Let me know in the comments below the video on YouTube, or of course in the comments on the corresponding post on my blog. Oh, and of course get the layout there too. You can print and download it with all the measurements. Okay, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye. That's it for this time. If you've enjoyed this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. And for more from me in the future, please remember to subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching.